Hello and welcome back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing innovative technologies for putting out wildfires, and we're hoping we could actually blow them out with jet engines. Crazy idea, but I've heard crazier. Maybe it'll work, and you can check us out on the web at teamwildfire.com. Today, I've got a fascinating guest joining us. I have Dr. Jeannette Sutton, and Dr. Sutton is, and I might just call her Jeannette during the show, but you can call her Dr. Sutton until she tells you otherwise. Dr. Sutton is an expert in warnings. So you see a little thing pop up on your phone and it says, warning smoke, warning air, warning fire, whatever, do this, don't do that. And how we make sense of those messages and whether we listen to those messages is a function of how they're written, what they say, what the content is, how clear it is, what authority it's attributed to, a lot of things like that. So this is what Dr. Sutton's been studying. So that brings me to my first question for you. First of all, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thanks. I'm really well. Thank you. And I'm really happy to be here and excited to share with you what we've been working on.
Well, I'm going to ask you all about it today.
Good.
So my first question is, you lived in Boulder, Colorado. What on earth inspired you to move to Albany?
Oh, gosh. Oh, yeah. It's a long and winding path. I spent 17 years in the Boulder area, lived in Louisville and Lafayette and Longmont. And I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder for my PhD program. When I left Boulder and I went down to Colorado Springs for 4 years and worked at UCCS, where I was funded through the National Science Foundation and doing a lot of soft funded research. And as an academic, it's never an easy route to use just soft funding. It's like, you're constantly trying to get startup funding and never something that's consistent. So oh gosh, I can't remember what year it is now. 2014, University of Kentucky reached out and said, would you ever consider leaving Colorado and coming to Kentucky? And I said, oh my gosh, why would I do that? They said, well, because we want to offer you a faculty position. And so,
okay.
My advisor, Dr. Dennis Moletti, said to me, of course, you're going to take that position. You'd be crazy not to, because as an academic, a full-time, fully funded, salaried position in a university is not easy to come by. Okay. So then moved to Kentucky for 5 years. Actually found that Kentucky is really beautiful. It's very green, very lush. Lexington, Kentucky is the bourbon capital of the world, the whole area. So it's surrounded by bourbon distilleries. And there's also, of course, a lot of horse racing and there's a lot of basketball and it's a lovely community to be working in. And then University of Albany was developing a new program on emergency preparedness and homeland security. And as they were growing their faculty, they said, would you like to come and join us? And I said, well, that sounds like an interesting opportunity. So made my way farther east. And now I'm in Albany at the University of Albany. So practical reasons, not necessarily because I wanted to be in a different state, but every state I've lived in has offered really unique perspectives on the environment, the people, the politics. So it's been interesting. I do miss Colorado though.
Well, you're welcome back here anytime. We're live from Boulder. So all right. So let's get down to the matter of warnings. Turn it over to you.
All right. Well, I've been studying alerts and warnings since I was a grad student, back in during my time in Boulder. And the director of the Natural Hazards Center at the time, his name is Dr. Dennis Moletti. He was kind of I don't know if you'd call him like the founding father, but definitely the person who was pushing the agenda forward on alerts and warnings the most. He'd been studying them since he was working on his dissertation research, 1970s-ish. So he'd been working on it for a really long time. And when I was his grad student, he got me involved in that space also. And I started studying alerts and warnings with him, and then kind of shifted into thinking about risk communication through different mechanisms, different channels, and how that information is relayed to the public and how the public talks about it on those channels. And spent many years thinking about how we communicate on Twitter, now X, and how in the earliest days, the use of X was a great mechanism for people who were boots on the ground to share information, updates about what they were seeing and experiencing. In particular, thinking about things like wildfire and like that public information that was being shared on that channel, as people were listening to the police scanners, fire scanners, and putting in information that was really relevant for people who were making those decisions on the ground. It was vital at the time, because information from public officials came at that time very slowly, twice a day. A press release in the morning, a press briefing in the morning, a press briefing in the evening, and all these other things happen in the middle of the day.
Right.
You have to make a decision. How are you going to do that? How are you going to get that information? And at that time, information like alerts and warnings were being shared through like reverse 911, calling landlines, information on the radio, of course. Some communities have sirens. But fast forward to today, and the ways that we get our alerts and warnings are much more diverse and much more targeted, especially now that people can opt into messaging from their local community that can be sent from emergency managers.
Right.
And also through the wireless emergency alert service, which is operated by FEMA and the integrated public alert and warning system, so that those messages can be delivered to anyone who has a cell phone that is capable of receiving that message, which is generally, unless you're carrying like a cricket phone, that doesn't display text information,
Right.
you're going to have a device that's capable of receiving a WIA. And it is, as we described it in 2011, 2012, it's like having a siren in your pocket. Because if you're carrying your device and a message is issued from a local alerting authority, that message is going to reach you, so long as you haven't turned it off. It's an opt-out system. So your device it's turned on until you've decided you no longer want them on. And so that leads us to the importance of writing really good warnings, because the objective, in my mind, is not just to help people to take protective actions that are necessary, but also to help them to recognize the importance and the value of those messages, and help them to keep them turned on. So that was a lot of introduction to.
So what percentage of people turn them off?
That's a really good question. So 𝐼PAWS, which is the overall manager of this program, they'd really like to know that, an accurate count of how many people actually receive messages when they're issued and how many people have opted to turn them off. We have a little bit of information about that. So the way that 𝐼PAWS works and the way that WIA works is, if I was a local alerting authority representing like a local emergency manager, I would sit at my keyboard and I would create a message, and it would go through a software that I've purchased. That software would connect with 𝐼PAWS, and 𝐼PAWS would push the message out to cellular companies, and cell companies are responsible for distributing that message to your phone. And the messages fall into a number of categories. There is an imminent threat alert, which is for things that are fast moving and you need to take action right away. There's public safety alerts, which are not as fast moving, but still could climb to a level of relevance and importance for a person to receive that message. There are amber alerts, which is part of the 𝐼PAWS system. There are presidential alerts, which are now called national alerts. We've never had a national alert, but if you got a test message, that did come from the national alert. And then you can also opt in to receive a test message from your local alerting authority. Now, how many people have opted out? You can opt out of all of those except for the national test. national alert.
Okay.
And
That's
the problem,
incoming ICBMs.
yeah, that would
Got
be
it.
that
Yeah.
would be an ideal use for a national alert. If something like 9/11, if that were to happen in a major city, and everybody needs to be on alert that it's possible that something like that could happen elsewhere across the U.S. It's like, yeah, let's alert everybody so they know something bad is happening. But that's, I'm not even sure that at what level FEMA would push the go button on that. So I'm sure they have some ideas. But you can opt out of AMBER alerts, imminent threat alerts, public safety alerts, and you can choose never to turn on test alerts.
Mm-hmm.
And where we see people opting out primarily is AMBER alerts. They tend to be poorly written and poorly targeted, and not actionable. So especially
Right. I
statewide
agree.
alerts.
I agree. Right. There's a gray Subaru with this license plate somewhere in Illinois, 3,000 miles away from me.
Exactly.
Do I need to
Exactly.
stop my podcast to read that? Right.
Right. And that is not an actionable alert at all. And it's not relevant to you and the location that you're working in or living in. And especially if you receive it at a time where, you can't do anything about it. So people tend to opt out of AMBER alerts. And then there's these other categories of missing person alerts that are not AMBER, but they also go out through the iPause system. So things like a missing elderly person with a dementia, where they're called silver alerts, or in other states, they might be called a different color because states don't use consistent names for the different kinds of alerts.
Okay.
People opt out of those also, but they tend to be issued through imminent threat alerts, which is exactly what you don't want people to opt out of.
I see.
Because that's when you would get your wildfire message, is through the imminent threat alerts. So
the sky can only fall so many times.
Yeah. So we know that the largest number of opt-outs are in Texas. And up to maybe 15% of the population has opted out in Texas. But we don't know exactly why. We're just kind of relating it to possibly because they send out statewide alerts that are not actionable. Most people have left them turned on across the country, which is really good. But, if you're in Texas and you've chosen to turn your message off, but then you end up in Boulder and there's a wildfire, you're not going to get that wildfire message.
I see.
So that's a danger. Right. It's off unless you go back in to turn it on.
Which one of the 10,000 settings on my phone is that, right?
Well, I don't want to tell you, but it actually, when you receive a WIA, some of the operating systems now make it possible for you to swipe to go to your settings and turn them off. And so they put it on the front of the screen, which is not going to be the best practice for helping people to keep them turned on.
Right.
If
they
that's
should
your
make you really work to find the settings for that.
You can't. Yeah, it does take a little bit of time. I would have to spend some time going through my phone to try and figure out where is it again, because I don't remember exactly what setting it is.
So, by design.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a firestorm coming. I'd rather not know.
But most people do want to know. They do want to know about events that are near them and things that are really dangerous.
Yep.
And they don't recognize that when they turn off their WIA for a silver alert or a purple alert or an Ashanti alert or some other thing that just they don't know what they're even getting, that they're actually turning it off for all different kinds of imminent threat events and tornadoes, for wildfires and storm surge or flash flood. I mean, those are the kinds of things you're not going to hear about if you turn it off.
Yeah, right. And we're not just getting more warnings because we have better technology. We're getting more warnings because we have more occasions on which to be warned.
I hope that is the case. I hope that the messages that are shown, we do have a lot more occasions for which warnings would be eligible. And we also don't want to see the use of that technology, especially WIA, being overused or used in a manner that's that's going to make people think that it's not serious. In some locations, they've reserved that use of wireless emergency alert only for the worst cases, and they use their opt-in alerting systems or their other systems to reach people in other cases, because they want to reserve it for situations where this is the most important, most dire conditions. And so don't abuse that system because you don't want people to turn it off.
And some people are frustrated at the gatekeeping because they knew, okay, the authorities knew about this, but they chose to withhold it because they didn't trust that the public would know how to respond to this information appropriately. And then that creates this demand for more information, which leads to the development of apps like Watch Duty, where people say, like, I want to know the drippings as they're coming down. And then I'll make my own decision, and I might be prepared to act sooner because I made myself more informed.
Yeah, within the disaster research space, we've identified a number of things that we call disaster myths, and they're myths that have been perpetuated primarily about the public by people who are in positions of authority, who are really concerned that the public are going to become more of a hindrance to successful response than, and that's their big concern, is wanting to make sure that they have appropriate control and management of the situation and not putting people in harm's way because they haven't been able to control the public. And I use quotes, air quotes, for control the public, because it's not really possible to control the public anyways. But one of the myths is that, people are going to respond poorly to a warning. And so you withhold that information because they're going to panic. And panic is not something that we need to be concerned about with wildfire in particular, because people actually need more information. They don't need less information. They need it. They need more information. They need it in a timely manner. They need it in a way that reaches them when they're trying to make preparedness decisions or decisions about when they're going to take action. And when there's a vacuum of information, new apps are created like Watch Duty. People also go to their social media and they look for information from their friends and family. And when there's a lack of official information in there, people create their own answers.
Yeah.
That's where rumoring gets started, and rumoring can be good and rumoring can be bad. Misinformation is just misinformed, but disinformation is bad information that causes a lot of danger. And so, with that vacuum of information, that's where people were coming up with all kinds of new answers about what's happening on the ground. And they really do need that information in ways that they can act on.
Yeah. What else have you come across in the misconception research?
In my warnings research, so there's some.
No, I mean other like misconceptions that people or authorities have about the warning process.
I think there's some misperceptions about panic that have been perpetuated, and panic actually has its very own specific definition within the psychiatry and psychology fields, where it's when a person panics, it tends to be in places where they are trapped and they cannot get out. We see that in examples of like fires inside of facilities where the doors are barricaded or locked. So there's only one way in and out, and then a fire breaks out and people are rushing towards doors, but they find that the doors can't be opened. And it does create a real panic. Your elevated heart rate, unable to make a decision. And then, of course, being overcome by smoke. There's not much that people can do at that point, and they end up dying. But they truly do reach that level of terror as they're trying to get out. Most of the time when people are described as panicked because they're seen running away from a place, that's actually a very rational decision to get into your vehicle and leave, to run away from a falling building, to pick up the phone and call somebody with your heart rate elevated and very scared. Those are decisions that we're making about how to protect ourselves. And so I think that using the word panic, which is a really negative way to describe behavior that we take on when we're faced with danger, I think that that's really misrepresenting the way that people generally behave. And it also is one of those reasons that people withhold warnings. Another reason that they withhold warnings is because of the systems. As technology has improved, we've also seen that there are barriers to its effectiveness. So while WIA is described as a siren in your pocket, it also has had difficulties in becoming really targeted in geography. So there's a concern that if you can't narrowly target the specific phones that are going to receive that message, you're going to go beyond the boundaries of people who need the message, which might create this overwarning, this spillover into populations that don't need to evacuate. And it's because more people might receive that message, it might cause additional congestion on the roadways or difficulty moving people in the evacuation routes that you want them to take. Issuing, that was one of the problems that was identified by those massive wildfires in California where a lot of people died. But they also had other problems with their egress routes and such, where they were trapped because the fire surrounded them and there was no place for them to go, and they died in their vehicles trying to leave.
Right, because the evacuation route hardening hadn't been done.
Right. And not getting a message out early enough, and also the wind shifting and all of that. And so, it all coupled together. I mean, most of the time, my colleagues who study evacuations, they say most of the time evacuations go fine, but there's this slim number that go very poorly. And a lot of it can be related to the warning information that people are receiving and the timeliness of it. So this problem of geography, there have been groups that have been working on it by creating new technologies that allow alerting authorities, local fire agencies to create digital zones on maps and identify the phones within the people within those zones and issue messages only to those zones, which I think that it's moving in the right direction. It helps the firefighters operationally to identify, which zones are in which phases of preparedness and evacuation. And it also helps to target specific people with the information who need it at different phases. But where it starts to break down is the communication of that information, which is the space that I spend my time thinking. In particular, when we see messages that go out that say Zone 21A West, evacuation phase 1. And
what does that mean? Right. Most people don't know their zone, right? Yeah.
Right. And so this is where the work that we've been doing on alerts and warnings is so important, because we've been talking and doing research on how to communicate wildfire warning information using plain language that's really actionable. And the zone information, I think, is so useful, but we need to take those 21B West and turn it into plain language information for people who don't know what that zone means. They haven't been trained.
Between Broadway and 28th Street and north of Walnut and south of whatever, Valhalla.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Like, okay, that I could understand. I'm in there, or I'm out of there, and I know it.
Right. And helping people to get the, local landmarks. Like if you're west of Pearl Street in Boulder, like, okay, I can visualize that. I know where that is. Or between Broadway and 28th in Boulder. I mean, I know where that is. And so, giving people those very specific roads, landmarks, cities in the message itself, instead of just relying on this technological coded language,
Yeah.
which is great for
Jargon.
people who are operational, but not so great for the public who are receiving those messages on their devices.
Okay. So what are the elements of a good message?
I'm so glad you asked. People need to be able to make decisions based upon the information in the message. And so they need to know who the message is from, first of all, because I mean,
Who's the authority? Yeah.
right. Well, a local authority, somebody who has some sort of credibility, but also, I mean, think of the number of messages that shows up on your phone and you don't know what in the world have you subscribed to, or who's sending you a message now. And so differentiating that your message is, credible and trustworthy is the first thing. So the source information. Second, people need to know what the hazard is. If you just say evacuate now and you haven't said what's going on, you don't know that you're evacuating for wildfire, or maybe it was a chemical release, or maybe you're being told to leave because there's a flood coming out of the mountains and, it's going to hit Boulder Creek and downtown's going to be flooded. I mean, if you're paying attention to the environmental cues, you're probably going to know, but telling people what the hazard is really important, and also what it could do. Like it's moving fast, and there's smoke and there's ash, and there's also the fire is going to block these egress routes, and so you need to know that what it's actively doing and how it could affect your decision making. So source, hazard, location, which we just discussed, 28th and Broadway, and then these other side streets, giving that very clear information. When the message was issued, or by what time people need to take action, so that if they know they have 15 minutes, they have 15 minutes. If they know they have 2 minutes, they have 2 minutes. Like acting immediately.
Right.
And then one of the most important pieces, which is frequently left out, is guidance, actionable information. What should people do? If you have 15 minutes, gather these things and go. If you have 2 minutes, you better have had your go kit sitting next to your front door, because it's not time to be collecting your documents and taking pictures of your valuables for insurance.
Right.
You had to have done that ahead of time, which is the importance of the timeliness of information coming out from the authorities. And so that actionable information also is something that's frequently missing from messages that say evacuation warning in this particular zone. Evacuation warning means something different from evacuation order. And you have to know the jargon to know the difference between those two things. And across the country, there are a range of different jargon terms that are used by fire officials and other public agencies to indicate something similar, but using different language. So, and that language is supposed to cue the public into knowing what the hazard is and what they're supposed to do, but it requires public education to know that. But evacuation warning means to prepare to evacuate, and evacuation order means go now. But when we've tested that language, just with people in California, because that's where they use that language, we've asked people to define those terms, and people think that warning and order mean the same thing. There is
Whereas
no
if you were to just say
differentiation.
prepare to evacuate.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I get it. Get some stuff together.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a plain language approach, which is what we've been encouraging. But unfortunately, some of this jargon language is adopted by officials that are really steeped in jargon, and they think, we know it, therefore everybody else knows it. Well, that's not true. So we need to move to this more practical, plain language approach, which is what we've been advocating in all of our work.
So the aspects are who's saying it, what are they talking about, where are the areas that are affected, and what should I do about it?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of your journalistic approach of like who, what, where, when, where, why, how, but it's it's organized in this warning space, so that the first thing that people see is who's sending me the message and what's the hazard, where is the hazard located, and what do I do? How do I protect myself? And giving a member of the public those key pieces of information, is going to, our research has shown that when you give them that information, it reduces the time that they spend looking for the information, and it increases their ability to take action quickly. When those key pieces of information are missing, that's when people go looking for it. That's when they turn to their social media, they turn to their neighbors, they make phone calls, they turn on the radio, they turn on the TV, trying to understand what's happening and what am I supposed to do right now? And what are my friends and family members doing? Are they also taking this seriously, or do they have questions too? So in fast moving events, and we know that wildfires move very fast in some cases, a fast fire means people need to act really quickly. So that more actionable, concrete, direct, plain language information that you can give to people, the more quickly they can take action to get themselves out of danger.
So one of the worst things that could happen, which is a possibility, would be that people are hacking these systems and sending fake messages, right? And creating distrust of whether the source really was the Boulder County Sheriff's Office or somebody who hacked their site.
Yeah, I know that the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, the Science and Technology Directorate they're concerned about that. Certainly there is the possibility that these systems can be hacked. And I'm not a technology expert, so I don't know the layers of security that are in there. But, in order to get into your phone, they'd have to hack quite a few layers to do so. But absolutely, there are bad actors out there who would like nothing more than to cause chaos and disruption and decrease our trust in authorities even more than it's already been affected. In some places, there's no trust at all. And, trying to help people to believe that messages from a public safety official are credible and trustworthy is, once that trust is gone, is very, very difficult to help to regain it in any way.
I'm glad DHS is working on that.
I just wish we could work faster. I don't represent DHS, but I do know that things move pretty slowly.
In a branch of the government?
Yeah. My research was primarily funded by FEMA, the work that we do on wireless emergency alerts. And we're finishing up our last 6 months of this award, this contract. And we started our work 3 years ago. And we had a number of tasks to complete. And with my little tiny team of grad students and a few professional researchers and a few professional programmers, we were able to we published 12 papers, did presentations across the country. We trained more than 700 emergency managers on how to write good wireless emergency alerts. And we built software called the Message Design Dashboard, which is available to anyone. Anyone can have access to it. You don't have to be a public official to use it. So private industry can use it. People in other countries can use it. So this Message Design Dashboard, it's a software that we delivered to the federal government in the 3 years that we had our funding. And it's now available. And it walks you through the things that we just discussed about what is in an effective message. So somebody who's sitting at their keyboard and needs to write a good warning message for wildfire, if they haven't thought about this ahead of time, they could sit down and they could walk through the Message Design Dashboard and they would be told, fill in here. What is the source sending the message? Next, choose your hazard. Okay, it's a wildfire. Here are the potential impacts of a wildfire that you would want to include in your message so that people understand what the hazard is. And then it asks you, where's the location? You fill that information in. They say, okay, what is the guidance you want to give to people? And then you can select from different options of guidance, like prepare to leave, get your go kit together. Or if it's a time to leave, it's leave now, go in this direction. And by the time you've finished writing that message, because it's walked you through each step, you have a complete message that has the structure and the contents have already been validated by subject matter experts. And is significantly better than the messages that we see going out that are the standard of practice today. But I'm really proud of that because it demonstrates that with focused funding from government agencies to groups that are really eager to build things using evidence to design the technologies and to inform the practices of public officials, we can create really amazing things that are immediately useful. And the feedback that we've gotten from those who have taken our training on the message design dashboard have said that it's a game changer for alerts and warnings. And we've seen it utilized for a number of different events across the country so far, including wildfire. And most recently, the Malibu wildfire in Southern California, we saw the structure of messages being issued that follows what the design that we've been advocating for. Plain language, clear, actionable information, really excellent work out of those. I think it was the fire agency that was writing those messages, and it was really great to see. And CAL FIRE was also doing great work.
I bet that was very satisfying to see the results of your research being implemented.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I write about it on my website called The Warn Room. So that's my little sign up there, thewarnroom.com. And I wrote about, good wildfire messaging and also bad wildfire messaging. So you can see like these are the places where we can improve, and trying to give really concrete guidance to message writers so that they can do better in the future.
Well,
so
tell me about how you
who's-
test. How do you compare messages to see which is a better message?
So we do a lot of experiments. We've assessed the contents of all of the messages that have gone out over WIA. We can tell you that they're not very complete and they're not very actionable in general. But then we've done experiments with people to design messages that are actionable by providing the contents that we've just discussed and varying the use of language, like having a message that uses only jargon, like evacuation warning, and not telling people what the hazard is or what they're supposed to do, and then measuring their understanding and what additional information they need in order to make a decision. And so we can show that by using particular message contents and structure that the messages are more actionable, more motivating than the messages that are the standard of practice. So one of the things that emergency managers want to know is whether or not their message led to compliance, right? Did people do what I told them to do? Right. And here's the challenge that we have with compliance is that when we're looking at a single message, it's really hard to know that that one message is the thing that caused people to do something, especially if they're also tuning into social media, they're getting text messages, they're paying attention to the environment, they're listening to the radio, they're tuned into the local media, they're getting phone calls on their, the reverse 911. So there's, dozens of other places they could be getting information from. Very difficult to zero in on that one message that you wrote as an emergency manager. That's one of the first things. It's really hard. And also getting the immediate feedback from people we don't usually attach surveys to our messages to know whether or not that particular message is the one that caused them to take action. Right. And so you go back after the fact, months later, and people don't remember what message it was that caused them to take action. Usually it's that they got a call from their family friend, and that was the thing that motivated them to really pay attention to do something about it.
Right. You got a call from your mom in upstate New York. It's like, I heard there's fires in Boulder. Are you safe? Like, oh, I didn't hear about it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That is what usually causes us to really pay attention to somebody who cares about us, contacts us and says, hey, have you heard? It's time to take action. But then the second part about compliance that I think that we need to take into consideration is that even if you received a really good message, that message may not actually tell you exactly what you should do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if you don't, what if your kid is down the street and you're being told evacuate now, but you know that you need to run 2 doors down to get your kid to go with you before you evacuate? You're not complying immediately with that message. But that's what we would measure if we were measuring compliance, is whether or not you did something immediately. And so there are other steps that might occur before you take the action that you've been told to take.
Right.
So measuring compliance is really hard. And in some cases, also, compliance is something that people can't do. Some people
Right.
can't do what you're being
Physically unable to do it, or
exactly. And so what we try to measure is whether or not messages motivate people to take an action that protects them. And that is one of the reasons we want to include information about what the hazard is doing, so that people can make a decision about where it's moving, the time that they have to gather things and go, or make a decision to shelter in place or some other protective action they're going to take. And obviously, the biggest objective is for people not to die. But and compliance may not be to your one message may not be the only way to prevent people from dying. But the messages need to motivate people to take an action to protect themselves. So it's kind of a complicated question about how do we measure whether or not it's effective, but we do know that messages that are complete will reduce the amount of time people spend seeking additional information to take the action that's going to keep them safe.
Right. Went outside to your porch and yelled to your neighbor, "Did you get an alert too?" Right.
Well, that's, that when we don't have power and internet connection, that's exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah. Right. No, I've been the recipient of those shouts.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it seems like there's a lack of information even when there's not an emergency. There's been plenty of times where I see smoke on the horizon and I smell the smoke and it's drifting towards town, and I don't know if there's a fire or not. And were it not for watch duty, I wouldn't have known that it was a prescribed burn. And so there I am, taking preparative action unnecessarily, because no one in the community said, "Hey, we're doing prescribed burns today. If you smell the smoke, that's probably where it is."
Yeah. And I wish that there was other ways for us to get that kind of information more quickly and from reliable sources. This is where X used to be a great place to find out what was going on. We had smoke here in Albany in the fall of 2024, where it was drifting up from the Catskills, and I wondered, is that really from the Catskills or is it more local?
Or is it from Canada?
It could have been coming down from the north. And I mean, I just knew that the skies were really hazy and it smelled like smoke, but I couldn't find anything on X. And there's nothing coming out from their local officials. And, so watch duty would fill that gap. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting when you see a private company, albeit a nonprofit, fulfilling a need that one might have hoped the government would anticipate and have taken care of in advance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I think that there's a lot of interest in privatizing most of the services that the government can offer. And alerts and warnings are no different. There are some companies that believe that the local governments should not be in the business of issuing alerts and warnings. It should all come from private organizations. And in particular, I'm thinking about the National Weather Service and how they issue tornado warnings. And some private companies say, nope, it should come from us. And well, that's great, but that means people have to know to buy your system and opt in, and then have the money to keep it going. So
you
there's
could
a
do
disparity.
both, right? You could have the government hiring a private company to implement a contract.
Possibly, yeah, that could work. Yeah.
I don't know. I was confused by a weather notice I got today. So the headline said, "Severe weather alert," And then under that, there was a category, and it said degree of severity, moderate. So it's either a severe weather alert or it's not. Or
right.
how many
Yeah, and
shades
that
of
may
severe
be
are there? I don't know.
that may be something that your phone is doing, the operating system, and kind of categorizing information that's coming from the National Weather Service into these different buckets. Or it could, I don't think that that's the, yeah, I'm not really sure how the connection is between the operating systems in the phones and the information that comes from the Weather Service, but that does seem like a real inconsistent way of communicating whether or not you need to really pay attention or not.
Yeah, right. So you're 6 months from done on a 3-year grant project.
Mm-hmm.
One of the outcomes of that was the message dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and presumably there's more deliverables on this over the next 6 months. Then what? What have you come across maybe in the course of the last 3 years or previously that's going to set a direction for you going forward when you're done with this grant?
Well, within the wildfire space, there's still more work to be done because there is so much jargon that's used by different communities. There's a really inconsistency of language. California use evacuation warning, evacuation order, but you just go north to Oregon and Washington, or even over to Arizona, go west, and you see the use of ready, set, go language combined with phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And again, it's this jargon information that's, unless there's a public education campaign, people who get that message may not understand what it means. And we might even say, well, of course people know what ready, set, go means. Well, maybe, but what's the difference between ready and set? And if you say I'm in a set status, what in the world does set status mean? And then, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, well, that seems like it should be easy. Like phase 3
Is
should
1
be
the most severe or is 3 the most severe? Right.
Exactly. That is always my question, because sometimes emergency operations centers, which is, where emergency managers go during an activation, it's level 1 is the most dangerous. And so it's, everyone's there, but in some cases, level 3 is the most dangerous.
Right. Respond code 3, respond code 1. They mean the same thing in different jurisdictions.
Exactly. And so that's one of my concerns, is trying to help to identify better plain language approaches that can be used regardless of the location, and advocating for that. But that's also a policy issue, and states that have adopted specific approaches are not eager to change their approaches after investing so much funding in their public education and their planning across the state. So that's kind of we'll continue to collect the data for people who are decision makers to make those decisions. And hopefully the data informs those decisions.
I thought the doomsday clock was a good measure. But does it work on a digital clock? I don't know.
I don't know. The other space that we're spending a lot of time in for alerts and warnings is thinking about missing persons alerts. Because of the question that we talked about at the very beginning, which is, why do people turn off their wireless emergency alerts? And not only is it because messages are not actionable, but just like with wildfire, there's this inconsistent use of jargon. And there's an insistence on the use of jargon, which is meaningless for people if they don't know what these different names are for the different kinds of missing persons. You've got different states that have adopted different colors for the same kind of alert. Purple means the same as silver, means the same as Ashanti, means the same as feather. But different kinds of persons are represented within these different person categories, are represented in these different kinds of alerts. And I don't know that it's necessary for people to know the difference between an ebony alert or an Ashanti alert to take action to help you to find a person who's missing. They need to know who they're looking for.
Right.
using that language, it may be that it's not serving its overall purpose of helping to find the person. It may be doing serving a different purpose, that may be more political.
Sure. Right.
So working on that is another big thing that we're working on. And I'm also really curious about what's going to happen in the future with AI. I don't have any predictions beyond in a few years, things are going to be improved dramatically. And I think we probably will be seeing AI used for alerts and warnings, but I'm hesitant to make a recommendation for its use until we can see consistency coming out of these systems and know that they've been trained on effective messaging and not just whatever, some chat system is hallucinating at the time.
Right. Yeah. And also because AIs train themselves on data, you run the risk that they're going to train themselves on the data that's most prevalent rather than on the data that's most effective.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we know what effective messages look like, and we have a whole body of messages that have been coded that a system could be trained on, but haven't started working on that yet. So maybe in the future.
Well, you'll finish your grant and then you'll get onto that, right?
Right. Maybe.
Very, very interesting. Would you recap for me what the elements of a good warning message are?
Sure. The source of the message, the hazard, the type of the hazard and what the hazard is doing, the location of the hazard, the time of the message being sent or the time when people need to take action, and the protective action guidance, what people should do to protect themselves from that hazard and what it's going to do to them. Those are the 5 key elements of a message.
And if I wanted to get a copy of the dashboard, where do I go for that?
I'm going to have to give you the web address that maybe you could plug into your description of the podcast. You can't Google it, unfortunately. FEMA didn't make it easy to find.
Is it linked from the Warn Room?
It's not, but that's a really good idea. Maybe I should put it in there. Yeah, go to the Warn Room, and I'm going to make sure that people can access it from the Warn Room, and that's thewarnroom.com. It's WARN, Warn Room.
Right, not the room for hot yoga.
No, room, right? Not warm and not war.
Right.
Warn.
The Warn Room. Okay.
Yeah.
As in used frequently to the point where the carpet has holes in it. Oh no,
that's WORN. And this is WARN.
Well,
that's funny.
Even the simplest thing, messaging can be mismessaged.
Absolutely, it can. Yeah, we're trying to improve that.
Well, you're doing a great job with it, and it's fascinating learning about the work you do and how you're doing it. And now it seems like the work on creating a good message is simple enough that you've pretty well got the formula. Now it's just a matter of gaining adoption within emergency agencies. So,
yeah, and the farther we can spread this message, the farther we can spread this message to alerting authorities and others who are responsible for writing good messages, the more adoption we'll have. And if you're listening to this and you are somebody who writes alerts and warnings, you could still be an early adopter. And isn't that a prize?
Right.
Or you could just do it because 700 other people have been trained already. And it's a really good practice because we know that it works.
Well, good. I hope to see adopted more, and I hope to see the better messaging popping up on my own phone.
Yeah.
And I hope that there's not cause to send it too often. So
I agree. Thank you.
We're chatting with Dr. Jeannette Sutton. You can read her work at thewarnroom.com. Thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Jeannette Sutton, thewarroom.com. Check it out. Learn how to write a good message. It could save lives. I'm Steve Wolf. You've been watching or listening to the Fire Break right here. Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire. Look forward to seeing you at the next one. Until then, if you've got a message to send, follow the instructions on the warning dashboard. Talk to you soon. We'll see you at the next one.